It feels like Katrina was yesterday, and then sometimes it feels like it was a dream of another life.
Katrina runs like a long movie in my brain.
I take deep breaths because I come from a people who know how to come back, so I will start again.
Even though I'm like 27 now, I was like 7 when it happened. Convention Center packed. I just remember like being like shoulder to shoulder, people like shoving each other.
We lived in the hotel for a year because something without lungs blew the city into a wound.
That was a look at part of the trailer for the film Hope in High Water, A People's Recovery 20 years after Hurricane Katrina. The new documentary traces the fallout from one of the deadliest disasters in American history. In the film, Pulitzer Prize and Emmy-winning journalist Trymaine Lee returns to New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where he first reported on the storm, and uncovers the recovery effort forged by local leaders. Joining us now, host and executive producer of this film, Trymaine Lee. He's also an MSNBC contributor. Trymaine, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for doing this. This is one of those stories that got so much attention in the United States 20 years ago and around the world. I know that all of my friends in Europe were kind of watching, amazed at what they saw in New Orleans. And then, as is the nature with these stories, people don't always go back. So I'm so glad you did, and you did this documentary. What did you find?
I'll tell you what, Katty, thank you so much for having me this morning. It's hard to imagine that 20 years ago, around this time in the morning, those levees in New Orleans broke. And I was just a young reporter at the local daily newspaper then, the Times-Picayune. And I saw those early struggles of folks. When those levees broke, it also revealed something broken within New Orleans, where folks were dehumanized. Folks who had been pushed into these communities, these low-lying communities that were already susceptible to flooding, and made even more so. And 20 years later, I think it's easy to reflect on all the devastation and all the destruction. But what I wanted to do with my team is go back to New Orleans and reveal the other story of people rebuilding, that even though there were things broken, like levees and inequality, right, and wealth and income gaps that were wide as the Mississippi River itself, there were folks standing up to patch communities together that had long been failed by politicians and other infrastructure and you know, the city. And so it was an honor and a pleasure to go back and tell that story, not just the one of what was lost, but also what was gained.
Susan, you've been writing about this story too. Are you looking at the side that Trymaine is looking at? Are you looking at what happened back on the day itself? What are you focusing on?
We've been looking at what's happened to the people, who many of whom were forced out of New Orleans then, some of whom came back, many of whom did not, and also what lessons Americans take from that. And one of the surprising things we found in a new USA Today Ipsos poll that is out today is that most Americans remember Katrina. Think of all the things that have happened in the past 2 decades, but close to 9 out of 10 of Americans remember Katrina, including 3/4 of Americans who are under 35. Now, you think about it, they were teenagers or not yet born yet when Katrina struck. But there was something about the storm that left such an imprint, and not just in the South, across the whole country, that remains. And, you know, Trymaine, I wonder, one of the things that we explored in our coverage is whether things are different now. One thing we found was people did not have any confidence that the federal government would do a better job now in handling a big storm than they did then. 1 out of 5 said, yes, the federal government would do a better job now. The rest didn't think so. What have you found when you think about lessons learned or not learned about Katrina?
It certainly seems like there are a lot of lessons unlearned or not learned. I spent some time earlier this week in New Orleans talking to folks, and one thing that many of them said time and again was that they said if the storm were to happen today, it would probably be worse. We remember the image of George W. Bush in the airplane looking over as folks were scrambling for food and safety, and imagining a Donald Trump presidency, one wrought with so much violence, systemic policy violence aimed at the very folks who suffered so much during Katrina. There is little confidence that things would be better. And that's why, again, folks have had to, unfortunately, rely on themselves. And we speak to that point in the documentary of folks standing up when no one else could or would. But there is very little doubt that some of those issues that were exacerbated by the storm remain so today. If you were well-heeled in New Orleans before the storm, you were well-heeled after. And if you were marginalized before the storm, you were marginalized after, even more so. And so I think there's no doubt that folks are feeling a lack of confidence in that way. But again, people find a way to harness everything they have, the sense of agency and power. Even when their resources are slim, they find a way. And I've found that time and again in New Orleans.
Host and executive producer Tremaine Lee, thank you so much for joining us. You can stream Hope in High Water, A People's Recovery 20 years after Hurricane Katrina right now on Peacock.